WhatsApps, emails, FBI, FD 1023, suspicious activity reports, bank statements, whistleblowers, and 2 former business associates. Yeah, it's not looking too good for Joe Biden. Now, Democrats may try to convince you and themselves that there's no there there, but even they know better than that. If dodging Biden corruption evidence was an Olympic sport, these liberals would win gold. Trump got impeached over a fake dossier and then impeached again over a flippin' phone call. So certainly there's enough evidence to impeach Joe at this point. Shoot, the money and paper trails following that guy around make Hillary's emails look like jaywalking. But speaking of old Hillary, are y'all noticing that as much as the DNC and mainstream media members shielded her, it's nothing compared to the cushion job they're performing on the big guy? And why is that, do you think? Well, for me, it's obvious. The Democrat Party does not want Joe. Polls show us that. They know he's too old and too crooked to run for president in 2024, and they really wish they could unload him, but they can't. Not yet. Why? Because they still have a Kamala problem, y'all. Democrats are still circling the wagons around Joe because they haven't convinced either of them to step aside for Gavin yet. If they let it rip on Joe, like I highly suspect they want to, then they're going to be in an even worse spot having to run Kamala in 2024. There is no one worse to run in 2024 than Kamala Harris, except for Hillary. That's it. She's the only thing worse than Kamala. So they've got to keep covering for Joe. They got to keep pretending it's normal for 9 Biden family members, including a grandchild, to receive millions from foreign entities. They simply have no choice because the only other option, at least till she's bought off somehow, is to wheelbarrow Kamala to the top of the ticket. Kamala is Joe's insurance policy, but not for the reasons we initially thought. You know, if liberals weren't so feral, I'd really feel badly for them. But for now, I'll just pull up a seat and watch the train wreck. Thus far, we've sent $113 billion over to our track-suited friend Zelensky in Ukraine, and it doesn't look like the money train will be stopping anytime soon. But whether you fly that Ukraine flag next to your pride flag or not, you deserve to know how this money is being spent, even if you don't care and get a kick out of watching your tax dollars burn. And same thing goes for the IRS. I bet you didn't know that since 2006, the IRS spent $35.2 million on guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. Yes, tens of millions in weapons for the Internal Revenue Service. Something isn't adding up here, so let's bring in Open the Book CEO and founder Adam Andrzejowski with what you need to know. Adam, I'm so excited to have you and get into the books here.
Well, it's great to be on the program, Tommy. Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, I have a lot to get into, but I want to start with Ukraine because this, out of all the issues as of recently, has been the one that's been burning my behind the most. So I know that your organization is doing a lot of bookkeeping work, a lot of looking into the bookkeeping and the dollars and cents of all this. But just to give my audience an overview, what do they need to know about our government, our tax dollars, and what we're spending in places like, I don't know, Ukraine?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first off, I think everyone needs to know that your corner grocery store has better in-house financial accounting controls than the United States military. Tommy, they just misstated the amount of Ukraine aid to the tune of $6.2 billion. They blew their accounting on what was given to Ukraine. First, a couple of months ago, they admitted they were off by $3 billion. Then they had to restate that number all the way up to $6.2 billion.
So it feels like that's a really odd mistake to make, a very odd oversight. You know, you'd think, I understand it's the government. You know, I don't expect them to be necessarily on top of their game, but that's a whole lot of money to overvalue. So I'm wondering, when we look at all this spending and where it's going, does your organization have concerns that the money that we're sending over there is going over there for its intended purpose and that the bookkeeping on that side is keeping up with what we're sending and we can actually track what our tax dollars are being used for?
No, I don't have confidence in that. Let's put the $113 billion, Tommy, in context. So the entire estimated military budget of China is a little over $200 billion. The estimated budget for Russia of their military is $80 billion. We've given Ukraine $113 billion worth of U.S. taxpayer money in terms of aid. It's a tremendous amount of money. And I'd feel a heck of a lot better with it if the Pentagon could just pass their audit. As you know, Trump forced the Pentagon for the first time in history to undergo an audit. It's 1,600 auditors every single year since 2018. They spend about $500 million of U.S. taxpayer money doing the audit of the Pentagon. And for 5 straight years, the Pentagon has flunked the audit.
So what does that mean? Are there any consequences for something like that? Because it doesn't feel like it. And if there are, the average American like myself is unaware of any repercussions that would happen with them essentially wasting taxpayer dollars or not accounting for taxpayer dollars the way that we would expect, given the fact that we're hemorrhaging it to organizations and to different entities like the Pentagon. Is there anything that's done when they overspend or they miscalculate like they have been doing?
Well, they say they're going to do better next year. So that's what the spokespeople always say after they flunk the audit. But I want to give you a real-time example of waste at the Pentagon, because right now we're putting about $830 billion into fiscal year 2024 into the Department of Defense. And so there is bloat there. For example, there's a recent government audit that showed that 3/4 of their office space is not being used because the Biden administration is allowing everyone to phone it in, to do remote work. Okay, so we took a look at how much money the Pentagon during 2020 and 2021 during the pandemic spent on furniture. Like nobody's in the office, Tommy. They spent over $800 million in those 2 years purchasing new furniture for folks that are not even using it.
Furniture, I mean, even if people were using it, that would still burn my behind to know that they're spending my tax dollars on furniture. I mean, drive down any inner city or any major city for that matter in America, and these cities are in shambles. People are living in tents along the freeways in every California major city, and they're spending that kind of money furnishing offices. I mean, that to me would infuriate Americans if they were aware.
The last time we did an audit of their end of year use it or lose it spending. So this is spending in the last 30 days of the year where the Pentagon spends down their budget this year to get the same or more money from Congress in the following year. We found that in the last week of the fiscal year, the Pentagon blew out 1 out of every 10 contracts in the last 7 days of the fiscal year. We found that they spent nearly $5 million on lobster and snow crab. They bought a $9,300 club leather chair. They spent $1 million on PBR, the Professional Bull Riders Association. They blew out $150,000 on public relations PR contracts. This is no way to run the world's finest military.
No, and imagine what those resources could be used for and what they potentially would need to be used for. And then let's also imagine the people that are on the front lines actually putting their lives on the line and the measly paychecks that they and their families receive and the compensation they receive. And then you've got people spending $1,000 on a frickin' chair. I mean, I think that would infuriate most Americans.
And look, the money that's going into Ukraine, $113 billion, I kind of believe, now I don't believe this, but I kind of believe that the establishment, the powers that be, think that's only a small down payment on what's to come. And I'm going to use for my evidence the 20 years worth of taxpayer money that flowed into Afghanistan. About 7 times that amount flowed into Afghanistan over the course of 20 years. And when Biden pulled out on the hasty withdrawal, they left behind up to 600,000 weapons, 75,000 military vehicles, including 1,000 mine-resistant vehicles, 25,000 Humvees. We left behind up to 16,000 pieces of night vision equipment. So, Tommy, if we ever go back into Afghanistan, it's going to come at a significant cost to our national treasure, the lives of men and women. We've lost the nighttime advantage. It'll come at a significant cost to our fighting forces.
And I think you're right about Ukraine. I think that they're just going to keep sending and sending and sending. I don't think that there's going to be an end to any of this. And a lot of the people in the military-industrial complex or those that receive donations from those in the military-industrial complex, They don't want it to end anytime soon. And that's what's so infuriating about all this. And I have a lot I want to get to the IRS next. But before that, I still want to just get a brief Cliff Notes version of COVID spending, because I can imagine that your organization was very busy finding all the accounting errors that came along with our COVID spending. Give me, the Cliff Notes version of what you guys found in that.
So COVID spending, it is the largest public fraud in the history of the country. Tommy, over the course of the past 3 years, nearly every single federal program was either legally gamed by the insiders or illegally defrauded. Up to $600 billion of COVID aid has been stolen by criminals, crime artists, and crime syndicates from around the world. But you also have the federal programs that were legally gamed. For example, we studied the 300 largest law firms in the country, and 126 of them took nearly $1 billion worth of forgiven Paycheck Protection Program loans. These PPP loans, they were designed for mom and pop businesses on Main Street. Those men and women who had their businesses shut down during the economic lockdown. It was never a program for the largest, most profitable law firms in the country whose partners were knocking down equity payments during the pandemic years consistently for over $1 million apiece. They had no economic hardship claim to nearly $1 billion worth of forgiven PPP loans.
Yeah, I mean, what a stupid time in American history. I can't imagine all the money that's still floating out there. I mean, we know in California you've got prisoners and inmates and dead people that took advantage of COVID dollars. So I can't imagine if we even could have a magnifying glass. I don't think we could find all of the wasted COVID spending, which brings me to our next point. The IRS, and then interestingly, which I haven't heard from a lot of other outlets beyond yours, the militarization of the IRS. There's been a lot of discussion about the IRS because we know that they want to hire tens of thousands of more agents, which makes a lot of Americans very uncomfortable. But the spending over at the IRS, and particularly on this type of equipment, I think that would also surprise most Americans. So let's get into that.
So, Tommy, we're the subject matter experts on the militarization of all the federal agencies, but specifically the IRS, since I published an editorial at the Wall Street Journal in 2016, and we just updated our numbers. So $35.2 million on guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment was purchased by the IRS since 2006. Overall, there's 103 federal agencies that have purchased $3.7 billion since 2006 in guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. And if you break that down, it's 27 traditional law enforcement agencies under the Department of Justice or the Department of Homeland Security, but it's 76 rank-and-file traditional regulatory civil agencies like Health and Human Services, like the Social Security Administration, the Department of Education, the Department of Transportation, and the IRS that have purchased millions of dollars worth of the gear.
That just doesn't make sense to me. Maybe I'm missing something, but could you give me a little context as to why an organization like the IRS would need military equipment, especially that large amount of military equipment? I mean, that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's true.
Well, it is true. Let's break down their pre-pandemic gun locker at the IRS. So ahead of the pandemic, they had 4,500 weapons in their gun locker, and they had stockpiled 5 million rounds of ammunition. The gun locker was comprised of over 600 shotguns, over 500 long barrel rifles. Those were AR-15 Smith & Wesson long barrel rifles, and even 15 submachine guns. Tommy, the IRS has over 2,100 special agents. The head count of the IRS special agent is now coming up on and approximating that of a U.S. Army battalion. Where is it written that the IRS should have a battalion?
I think a lot of Americans are going to be pretty ticked off when they hear this. I wish I had all day to talk about this because I'm sure there's so much government waste that's going on, and I think that it would absolutely make my blood boil. It already is. It'd probably give me some heartburn on top of that. But thank you, Adam, for everything that you guys do. I get your emails. I follow you guys. I try to keep my audience up to date on everything that you guys are doing, and thank goodness for you guys blowing the whistle on all of this because the American people deserve to know, and I'm going to make sure I get the word out in any way I can.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you very much.
And I'll talk to you soon, because I'm sure that the government waste isn't going to be ending anytime soon. So we'll get back into it and dig into some more Ukraine numbers after we send another $20 billion.